Yes guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be showing you the best time-lapse settings for the DJI Pocket 2. If you like what you hear or see in this video, be sure to subscribe. Let's get straight into it. When setting up the Pocket 2 to shoot a time-lapse, there are 5 main things we need to look at so your videos go from looking like this to this. The 5 main things are white balance, ISO, shutter speed, the interval, and having an ND filter. The first thing you want to do is make sure your white balance and ISO are set to manual. To do this, from the main screen, swipe down and then swipe left 3 times and make sure you're in Pro mode. Then head back to the main screen and click on the yellow Pro box in the top left corner. Next, click on exposure and make sure your ISO is set to manual. Then go back, click on white balance and make sure that's set to manual. Then go back and make sure your autofocus is on continuous and not single. Once you've done all that, head back to the main screen, swipe left to get to your shooting modes and then scroll up or down and find time-lapse. Once you've found time-lapse, swipe left on the screen. You'll then be taken to time-lapse, motion-lapse and hyperlapse. Motion-lapse is pretty much the same as time-lapse. The only difference is you can set the gimbal head to move from left to right or a custom movement. If you don't want the gimbal head to move, just select time-lapse. Today I'll go through motion-lapse settings so I can show you how to set the gimbal movement. Once on motion-lapse, swipe left on the screen. You'll then be taken to set your gimbal movement. The presets are left to right or right to left, and if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can set a custom motion. If you've selected custom motion, you'll be able to set this later. Once you've chosen your motion, swipe left on the screen. You'll then be taken to interval and duration. Choosing the right interval will play a massive factor in how your overall time-lapse will look. The shorter the interval, the slower things will move. The longer the interval, the faster things will move. Obviously it depends what you're filming and what look you're going for, but I usually set moving traffic or moving people at 2 seconds, clouds in the sky at 4 seconds, and a sun rising or setting at 20 seconds. An easy way to remember how to set your interval is the slower the shot is changing, the longer the interval should be, and the faster the shot is changing, the shorter the interval should be. For today's example, I'm going to be shooting moving cars, so I'm going to set the interval to 2 seconds. Choosing the duration depends on how long you want the final video to be. So for example, if I select 20 minutes, you can see at the bottom of the screen, it's showing me that the final video will be 25 seconds. If I select 30 minutes, it's showing me that the final video will be 37 seconds. So for today's example, I'm going to select 20 minutes, so I get 25 seconds as my final video. Once you've selected your duration, click next. We now need to set the shutter speed, and this is probably the most important setting in making sure your time-lapse doesn't look choppy and has motion blur. To change your shutter speed from the main screen, click on the yellow Pro box in the top left corner, then select exposure. To get a nice smooth looking motion blur in your time-lapse, we'll need to slow the shutter speed down. This means we'll also need to use an ND filter, as if we don't, the image will be too overexposed. Here's what the time-lapse will look like if we choose a shutter speed of a 50th of a second. You can see that everything just looks very choppy, there's no motion blur, and everything just looks really sharp. If we slow the shutter speed down even more to a 25th of a second, this time with an ND filter 32, you can see it started to create a little bit of motion blur, but still quite sharp and still a little bit choppy. If we slow it down even more, this time to a 10th of a second, with an ND filter of 64, you can see even more motion blur. Then if we slow it down to half of a second, this is now giving us the right amount of motion blur. Once you've selected the shutter speed that you want, head back to the main screen. We now need to set the motion of the gimbal. On the main screen, you'll see 1 and 2 in the top left corner next to Pro, and a plus sign in the center of the screen. Before we set the motion of the gimbal, make sure the Pocket 2 is standing in the correct location of where you want to shoot. Once it's in place, move the gimbal head to where you want the time lapse to start. Then click on the plus button. Then move the gimbal head to where you want the time lapse to finish. Click on the plus button, you'll see a green tick appear. If you want to change your selection, click on the blue cross in the top right corner. Once you've made your selection, hit record, the gimbal head will move and start recording. And that's it for the DJI Pocket 2 time-lapse settings. Thanks for watching. If you like what you've seen, check out my other videos, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.